So where are we today? Well, we're taking calls to Newcastle. Told you we were bringing coals to Newcastle, didn't I? Woodhorn Colliery Museum, the old Woodhorn Colliery near Ashington, Northumberland, not too far from Newcastle Centre itself. I'd like to introduce you to Colin, and he's part of the Woodhorn Narrow Gauge Railway. And they've been closed since when?
Since 2018. Basically, it's fallen to disrepair and it's rotted. So the group has got together last year as a wellbeing group, and we're just trying to restore the railway. So a year so far. We've mended the engines. Well, we've got them running.
Yeah.
Still need a bit more work to do on them. But our next phase is to relay the whole track, which is a kilometre track, which leads from Woodhorn Museum round to the lake, Queen Elizabeth Lake.
Does it go around the lake or just to the lake?
Just to the far end of the lake,
Yeah.
where the cafe and Premier Inn is.
All right.
So it goes as far as there. So a kilometre in length there, so 1 kilometre there, 1 kilometre back.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll aim to have it up and running within 2 years.
Really? And
Depending on funding.
It's narrow gauge. Are you using any ex-colliery stock?
Yeah, basically we've got 3 engines. The main engine, which is the Black Diamond, that was what we started up with originally, or the original group started up with, and that was donated by Bain Tempest Colliery.
Oh, yeah.
It was their training engine. Initially it was an underground engine. Their training engine blew up, and so basically got taken from underground to overground because it could work both, and so basically they used that as the training engine. And then when the cold war closed, they donated that plus 3 man riders for us to set up originally. Since then we've got 2 more engines. One of them's a Shoma, which was used in the making of the Channel Tunnel.
Right.
And then the other one is a little Hunslet underground shunter, which is just transported over 10 years ago from the mines in Singapore.
Oh, wow. Really?
So we've got the 3 engines. They do us fine. I mean, down the line we'd like to get more rolling stock and more sort of disability dependent, because man riders are of their time and era and underground the hairy miners rather than general members of the public. So we'd like to improve our rolling stock down the line, but we need to open first.
So you're looking to open, maybe start on the track next year, you say?
We'll start relaying the track next month.
Yeah.
And we hope to, well, fingers crossed, we're aiming for Easter 26.
Oh, brilliant. Right.
That's our target.
Yeah.
I mean, it's flexible by year, but it's just it's all dependent on funding. But we've got all our volunteers are fully trained and capable. We've got ex network rail track layers. We've got mechanical engineers, electrical engineers as our volunteer, as our wellbeing group. So we've got all the skill sets. We just need pens.
Yeah, of course. So you've got a Facebook page and you've got a YouTube channel.
We've got a Facebook page and we've got a website. At the moment.
Right.
The website is woodhornrailway.co.uk, but the Facebook page is just Woodhorn Narrow Gauge Railway.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you very
Colin,
much.
I've appreciated that, and
Cheers.
also get a free ride.
You definitely.
Thanks,
Okay,
Colin.
take care.
Bye. Bye. Well, we are inside the museum, and thankfully I've got permission to do some filming. It's a fantastic layout. I think it's been used before, but it's been updated many, many times since then. Anyway, let's look round and see what we can find. Now, what we've got here is a collection of old lamps, and I'm glad, because there was at least 2 explosions at Woodhorn. There could have been more, but there's at least 2. One 1902 and the other 1916. And the one in 1902, actually they were both blamed on naked lights. They did use naked lights here. But the one in 1902, I'll tell you about it outside better, it banned the use of Scotch bonnets. And I thought, what's a Scotch bonnet? And there's one here, I'll show you. So if you look, That's a Scotch bonnet. It's an oil lamp. So it's filled with oil with a wick. We've got the old Spedding steel mill, and I think Eb said he's got original one of them. Obviously the candle. A carbide lamp, uses carbide gas, and we've got the one of the originals, or near original, safety lamp. I don't know if that's a Geordie lamp or not. I'm not the expert on them. But as you can see, it's all gauze. There's just no glass. There's just no glass whatsoever. So they said that those lamps basically were just bright enough to make darkness visible. If you listen, this is a cage, and in the background you can hear them all talking. They've got it set up like it's a young lad's first day at the pit, getting in the cage.
So, there's a new face here. Oh, Jackie. You got a joke in there? No, a word of advice. Get yourself some decent Morris. You
first day at the pits.
Why no?
This is one of the first things we did when we were training, but we did it at Woodhorn Colliery. Haulage, basically. That's the rope. These are the tubs. And these are the lashing machines. And I think different sorts of clips. I only remember we only did it for 2 weeks at Bold. We never had them at Upton Ballet or any other pit I worked at. But the idea was to learn how to lash tubs and bogies onto a moving wire rope without losing your fingers. There you can see the clip there. The chain's kind of lashed on. The chain lashed onto the tubs. They're moving 3 mile an hour maybe. This is great. They've got it set up like a coal face. Woodhorn and a lot of the Ashington group, they were mechanised from the word go. They weren't really like the Rosendale pits. But you see, that's the conveyor, or the panzer.
And shot up 2 points 9 yards apart. Well, get on, man.
I couldn't see out. The light's worse than useless.
And in the end, it'll send you blind. It'll keep you from getting blown to bits with the gas. Right, Johnny. That's what's start and finish point. Now, shift up the way. Unless you want us to pick your nose. Right, pass it that crowd. Watch you sit on your hunkers. Like this. Left leg under your body. Right leg straight out. So you can get a canny swing at the seam.
Why have you got all these?
Aye, well, wait on that.
Though,
Seam will be ready to drop with
they've got it set up like he's actually undercutting it, curving and jud with a pick.
Hard on you, Johnny.
Still got the conveyor here.
Shh. Quiet,
You
listen.
can see the drill. We're drilling the face up after they've undercut. Getting ready to fire it.
These pit profs will soon tell you when to do tunes in there for the surface. Yeah, right end of that squib for us. That's right. Okay. We're ready. Let's clear what tools we get.
Ready?
Hey, come on. Shoot, get it. Come on. There it comes. 3, 2, 1.
Well, the pits had bass for a big boom. I mean, even when I started at the private mines, we didn't have any bass. We came home black, as we used to say. And I found a newspaper cutting when Woodhorn Baths actually opened. Before that, it was the old tin bath in front of the fire. Yeah, it's a bit flickery, isn't it? And obviously you got the pit head bass and the lockers. I think we mentioned it a little bit when me and Mick went to Big Pit. I used to have a top locker. I think it was 508. And but below me, I remember the first couple of days at the pit, which was during Burnley Fair actually. this time of year. And I was a top locker, and he had to stand on the bench, and below me was a guy who went by the name of Johnny Dog, of dubious moral character. And he said, "How do? My name's Johnny Dog." And I'll not tell you what else he said after that. But as a young 15-and-a-half-year-old, I didn't feel very comfortable. And it is a different culture in this part of the country than it was in East Lancashire, where I come from, because Rossendale and Burnley and places like that were foremost textile towns. Yeah, they had a big mining culture, but really they were textile towns, whereas these were just dedicated pit villages. I mean, Ashington, just up the road from here, was really the biggest pit village in the world, and nearly everybody that lived in these villages, most of them worked at the pit or were associated with it. And another big cultural difference between here and East Lancashire is the women folk, the ladies of the house. Whereas back in Lancashire, a lot of the ladies, a lot of the wives, the girls, they went straight to the mill. They worked at the mill. Both husbands and wives worked. But the culture seems slightly different up here. We don't have the same culture going back to the 1840s, where women got banned from being underground because they weren't there then. They had been previous, but that practice had stopped. But the lady of the house here, just because she didn't go to the mill, doesn't mean to say she had an easy time. She had a hard time. She might have members of her family, menfolk, on each and every shift at the colliery. Her day began very early in the morning, getting the fire going, preparing the breakfast, getting the baits ready, continually making sure the clothes were presentable to go to work. And like I say, she could have men on each shift, so from dawn till dusk, she was at it continuously. The ladies of the community had a very hard life. Yeah, that goes to prove it there, yeah. Up at 1 a.m, Jimmy's coming off shift. There's a fire to rake out, a bath to fill, breakfast to cook. When he's off to bed, I've harangued the eldest, Michael, for his pick shift at 2 a.m, another breakfast, hat and boots to clean, bait to pack. Then at 5 a.m, young Bobby has to be at the farm by 6, another breakfast. 7 o'clock, and it's school for the birds. Obviously the politics were extremely important back in those days. The miners of Northumberland and Durham have got a rich heritage of forming unions, and they had a lot to fight against, a lot of injustices against them in the early days. The pitman's bond, working underground for maybe 17 hours a day for the young lads and what have you. And they had the big meetings. They had the Durham big meeting. This year's has just gone on. It still happens. And the Northumberland miners also had their own big meeting as well. I don't think it was called a big meeting, it was called something else. But, like I say, politics were very, very important to the miners. They relied on their leaders to try and get them a better life, if you will. I don't know what they'd think of today. That's it, the miners' picnic, that's what the Northumberland one was called. And it was a massive day out for the men and the families. A real fun day for them, even if it did rain. And he didn't like listening to the likes of Clement Attlee and Manny Shinwell braying on. Perhaps you just turned up to see the Coal Queen. Yeah, it was a male-dominated society, really. Could call it chauvinistic these days. Coal queens, beauty pageants, and each area had one. I remember when I started at Apton Valley, in one of the Valley magazines there. I think she was called Jill Knight. Her father was a shearer driver, and she was a coal queen at Apton Valley. So each area had its own pageants. People enjoyed it, they loved it. Whatever you might think these days, yeah, it was of its time. It didn't do any harm. In fact, it brought a lot of pleasure. As did the pigeons. Being hold of a pick and shovel, you know, isn't half a waste of talent. Miners turn their hands to all sorts of things, and this is an exhibition from a group called the Ashington Group. It was mainly a collection of Ashington pitmen who had a big appreciation for art. And they formed in 1934. They got some proper training as well, and they met every week and they painted about what they knew about the life in the pits, the life around the pit villages. And this, if you come to Ashington for nothing else, to see some of the paintings, they're fantastic, because here you've got a whole time capsule of a period in our history, all put down in oils. Chippy tea. Football. Obviously, Ashington has a big connection with football. All the North East, they're all Newcastle mad, unless you're from the other side of the weir, that is. But Ashington Colliery certainly had a big connection with Newcastle United. Famous Jackie Milburn, we're going to have a look across Jackie Milburn's exhibition in a minute. And also the Charlton brothers were brought up in Ashington, and Jackie actually went down the pit. He didn't stay there very long. His father were a pitman at Ashington, but Jack didn't really like it. I think he went to be a policeman after that, didn't he? And then finally thought, you know what, I'll have a go at this football art. And this is now where the Northumberland Records Office is situated, which used to be at Gosforth Park. Overdue a visit here and all. The Sistine Chapel, it might not be, nor the Mona Lisa. However, I think Oliver's paintings really are fantastic. 50 years he spent underground, and they all have an atmosphere to them. They're all got a good animation to them with the lighting, I think. And you can tell that they're painted by a guy that really knew his job. Fantastic. Maybe coming back to the Sistine Chapel, could it be argued that these have culturally as an equally contextual importance to the culture that was alive and that we've lost? Memories of a generation long gone that will never come back. That's my point of view. There are the workshops, the old workshops of the pit, and that building right behind us, well, there was a tanky engine, a little colliery engine kept in there, you know, for the railways. They now have sort of hard things in there now. But a lot of the infrastructure, the screens and everything, and the railway sidings that were behind us, they've all gone. At one time, all round here behind us, that was all railway sidings and colliery screens and everything. So there's a lot disappeared. So here we are then at Woodhorn Colliery. We've had a good look round the museum inside. And we're outside now. Morgan's on a lead. He's got to be on a lead. He don't like it. Go on, sit down. There's your good lad. Right, so Woodhorn, the northeast of England, near Ashington. And Woodhorn was owned by the Ashington Coal Company. It was the third bit that the Ashington Coal Company had kind of sunk, really. And it was sunk in 1894, 888 feet down to the Plessy coal. But for a start, it started mining coal from the lower main seam. Now, the Ashington Coal Company were world famous, really. Very big company. Ashington, like I said, got the nickname as the biggest mining village in the world. And they were a very go-ahead company as well. At the peak in the 1930s, they employed 5,000 men at Ashington Colliery alone. And they were producing 1.5 million tonnes Ashington Colliery at that particular time. Woodhorn obviously wasn't quite as big. Like I said, it started in 1894 and it closed in 1981, whereas Ashington itself survived the strike up until 1986. So let's have a good look round some of the buildings in the yard. We've had a look inside. Sadly, and it is sadly, they've got part of the pumping rods, not the rods, but some of the, I think it's the buntings from under the pumps at New Hartley, and they're in storage. They got them out for the Antiques Roadshow, but I couldn't get to see them, and it's sad because I wanted this to lead on to something else. But never mind. Make the best, it's not the best out of a bad job. Behind me you can see the two shafts of Woodhorn, and then to this side you can see what's known as the cutter. That's the inside museum where the Northumberland Archives records office is these days as well. And you can see it's sculpted to look a little bit like a shearer cutting head. So let's have a look around the buildings, and I'll try and give you a little bit of history of Woodhorn. I say I don't know a great deal about it. But we're part of the great northeast coalfield, the great northern coalfield. We know everybody is proud of the pit where they come from. They're proud of their area. But from wherever you're from, you've got to admit that Newcastle and the Northumbrian and Durham coalfield really are not exceptional, but a lot came out of those coalfields as far as engineering was concerned. Individuals like Stevenson, Buddle and people like that did so much for the coal industry. The unions, Tommy Hepburn we've talked about before, and the struggles that went on up here and the ingenuity that went into mining. They don't say that you don't take coals to Newcastle for nothing. And while East Lancashire and a lot of those areas down there, the coalfields relied heavily on the cotton industry, the textile industry. They were there, the coal industry was there because to provide the textile mills with fuel. Up here you've got no textiles, but you've got access to the sea and you've got access to the London markets and the world. And that's why really this coalfield was streets ahead, certainly, of the Lancashire coalfield. Anyway, let's have a bit of a look round before I alienate any more Lancashire men. Everybody always wants to see the stables, don't they? Our horses always get special treatment of the visitors and special interest, and rightly so. Actually, the last ponies used in the Northumbrian coalfield were at Ellington, not very far from here, and they came up from underground in 1994, so it was relatively recent, isn't it? A vast army of ponies was used underground, especially in Northumberland and Durham. Pony putting was a big thing, whereas back in Lancashire it was the drawers that did most of the work, but pony putting up here was a massive thing. We did have them in Lancashire as well on the main haulage ways, and a lot of them that we used were Galloway ponies because of the size. Now Friday the 4th of July 1902, it was actually a pay Friday night. Back in those days they used to get paid fortnightly, and it was on Friday, viz. Pay Friday night. Pay Friday rather. And the night shift used to go down the pit 2 hours earlier. They went down at 6 on a pay Friday. Usually they'd have gone down at 8, but they went down at 6, an hour after the hewers have left. Now then, the 4th of July, that also is an interesting date, because back on the 4th of July 1838, that was the day of the Husker Pit disaster back in Silkstone, where all the children got drowned, and the Clap Gate disaster in Rochdale, where the other 3 children got drowned. So quite a poignant day. Now usually before the men went on shift, the outgoing deputy did what's known as a pre-shift examination, where he examined the workings to make sure that they were safe for the oncoming shift. That had to be done, certainly in my day, every 4 hours. But because the men had gone down 2 hours early, there was no need for a pre-shift. So nobody had done an inspection since the last deputy had come round in the middle of the afternoon shift, you see. Now it was going to be a stone maintenance shift, so the only people underground were shifters, that's people who maintained the roadways and the tracks, stone men and pumpers. Now the men on that shift were mainly maintenance men, stone men, pumpers, shifter. A shifter was somebody that maintained the roadways, moved everything up and so forth. Noisy lot, aren't they? And I've no chips on me. Well, that evening, the men that we're interested in is George Johnson, he was on the pumps. There was Jim Douglas, he was aged 27 and he was a shifter. And working with him was a young lad, aged 17, a stone putter called James Huntley. Now there was a bit of a mix-up where those two lads were going to go and work. One area, they were working the low main by this time, and the low main had only been working about 12 months, and they were working with naked lights, and it's thought that they were working with Scotch bonnets. Now I've pointed out a Scotch bonnet up there inside, haven't I? It's just like a little oil lamp that goes on the cap, on the flat cap. Now the ventilation wasn't that brilliant, and one heading actually had got too far for natural ventilation. The bloke that was hewing in it, kind of thing, it started getting warm, so the fresh air wasn't getting to the front of the heading. So it had been blocked off, just fenced off, not because of gas, it'd just been fenced off. And there was a mix-up, and the master shifter went and told Jim and his putter to go and work in there. Or they believed that they had to go and work in there, let's put it that way. So they shifted the fences and they went in to begin work, and as soon as they went in, gas exploded and burnt them severely. And sadly, all three men eventually came, well, they succumbed to their injuries, the nasty burns that they had. They didn't die on the spot, but within over the next few days and weeks, sadly all three of them lost their lives. They didn't have the same medical procedures then, and they would have had third-degree burns all over their body. But the young putter was the last one to die, sadly, and he laid for days just suffering. So that was not a sad opening for the pit, because it'd been open for quite a while, but certainly a sad event for it, isn't it? And as a result, well, you had to do pre-shift inspections, even though those 2 hours hadn't up, there was still time left, if you know what I mean. They had to make sure an inspection was done before each shift started, let alone waiting those regulation 4 hours. The other thing to come about was, it looks like they banned the use of those Scotch bonnets, because the thinking was, because they were on top of the heads, a naked light, and as we know, gas is lighter than air, is methane gas, that obviously exploded the gas as they walked in. It wasn't proved, but that's what was thought. This is the downcast heapstead, the #1 pit, as you can see, with the upcast behind us. And every morning the men would go up those steps, up onto what's known as the heapstead. That's one of the biggest differences between the North East coalfield and the Burnley-Rosendale coalfield, is the heapstead. If you look how it's up a height, whereas most of those around Burnley and Rosendale was on the floor. You know, you walked under the gantry at Apton Valley at floor level and got in the cage there. I believe Bankhall was something similar. But in the North East, they're up a height. Like I said, it's known as the heapstead, and that's because they used, when coal was banked, when the cages came up, they came up to that level, that banking level, and then gravity was used in the screens to take the coal naturally downhill over the screens and into the waiting railway wagons. And where we're standing now would be where the screens were and railway sidings. This is the upcast shaft. The fan was There's a winding house in front of it. I think we can get in some of these buildings. Can you clock the shape of that building? Can you guess what's in it? Let's go and have a look. It's a Capel fan. This is the motor for the Capel fan. Now, I said there was 2 explosions at Woodhorn, and the ventilation is the main drama for the second explosion, but I want to explain it to you somewhere different, so we'll maybe go to the memorial. But in the meantime, this is the motor for the Capel fan, which the fan wasn't good enough. That was nothing to, it just wasn't powerful enough really. But the day of the explosion was a totally different matter. It was shut down for maintenance, and some other things didn't happen as well. But anyway, they installed a Walker's indestructible fan, which we had at Acton Valley, which they broke. So you've seen the fan, you've seen the motor. By the way, during the Second World War, the Luftwaffe managed to get a direct hit on the Walker fan house and totally destroyed it. Luckily, this thing was here to get out of mothballs, but the steam engine weren't good enough for it, and they had to get it going on electricity after a bit. Anyway, let's have a look on the other fan. Well, we're at the top of the number 2 pit now. Obviously it's filled in. We can see what the shaft top was like. The number 1 pit obviously drew coals. The number 2 pit drew men and materials, so all the supplies went down here. The men usually went down here. They might have gone down the coal shaft as well, the change of shift, I don't know, but usually it's the upcast that was used for man riding and materials. And here we've got materials ready to go down. See how work this, trying to keep hold of Morgan. If you can hear a dragging sound, it's Morgan dragging his lead. He isn't used to this. Now, because it's an upcast shaft, you've got to have an airlock, because obviously all the return air is coming up here, and if you didn't have an airlock, then the fan would short circuit. All the air would come in from the top and just come up and round the fan drift, wouldn't it? So you've got airlock doors. Here there's at least 3 sets of doors. There's one at the end of the building, one in the middle, and obviously these next to the cake, next to the actual pit top. And you'd only really be allowed to open one at once, although here they've got 2 open because it's a long train of supplies. Now, when I first started and we went to Colliery for our underground training, that shaft was 950 yards deep, and you went into the airlock, and it's a funny experience. If you've never been a pitman, never been a miner, it's a very funny experience, because you've got a massive pressure, a massive air pressure when you go in there. And to open these doors, one thing that some of the experienced men used to do was get the young lads to open the doors to make little lads out of them, because you couldn't open them. So if you notice, you see that little flap? There we are. What you would do, you would open that little flap, which would ease the pressure on the door, and then you try to open the door. Remember, you're opening it against a massive pressure. It's really hard to do, and many a little lad, young lad, 15 and a half, 16, 17, has been made to look, and even a little lad. But the noise here with the air was terrific, and also it made your ears pop, and if your ears didn't pop, it was very uncomfortable. So it was quite an hostile environment for a young lad to enter for the first time. See, obviously the shaft's now well and truly capped. Well, there's the cage at the top, double deck cage. It looks like they've got a cutter in there, an AB cutter being sent down. What's good as well is they've got a lot of sound effects going on. The sound effect at present is the shaft actually going down the shaft. We've got a few items on the supplies cart here. That's what cards we might talk about. Little quick rolls all right, size 1. There's the brakes on it. I don't know if this is electric. We had them running off compressed air. That's why I've got ringing in my ears all the time when I used to work on. Little electrical panel next to it. Explosives carriage. And then with the explosives carriage there. Little electrical panel, 550 volts. And there we've got a pump next to Morgan. And a cutter behind our pump. A cutter with a jib. Number 2 pit shaft winder. See the winding drum there? This is the new fan house, if you know what I mean, after the Capel fan, where they put the Walker's indestructible fan. That's where the fan rotated there. You can see the round bit on the building, and the fan drift is just behind. And obviously the fan drift went into the upcast shaft a short distance down from the surface. Now that was hit by a German bomb during the Second World War, but they put the Walker's fan in. They were very popular with the Walker's indestructible fans, but they put that in because the other fan just wasn't efficient enough. We notice next to us as well is a compressor house, 1953, that compressor house. The fan building was rebuilt after it was hit by a bomb. That isn't the original building, by the way. But it's interesting, the compressor house and the fan and the steam engine are all together with a story from the explosion from 1916, and we'll have a wander across to the memorial and I'll do my best to tell you what happened. Now we find ourselves on the 13th of August 1916, and it's a Sunday night, and obviously it's halfway through the First World War, and a lot of men had been enlisted, whereas even though the mines, the collieries were a reserved occupation, lots and lots had joined up, and they, we'd had the big push for the Somme and everything, so they were short on manpower also. And at the time now they're working the main coal seam, but again it's down to ventilation and naked lights. And obviously this is a memorial to the men that was lost in that explosion, the 13 men that died. Now I haven't read a proper report of what actually happened, but it was to do with the ventilation. I've read reports, but a detailed report of how the ventilation worked. They were using compressed air. Now the only way I know to use compressed air to ventilate is how we did it with what's known as a venturi, which is basically a large cone that looks like the cone of a trumpet, if you know what I mean, and around it there's little holes, and as you blast compressed air through those little holes it creates a vortex or a vacuum, and air is drawn into the back of the venturi, fresh air, and then propelled along a ventilation ducting, and that's how compressed air ventilation, as I understand it, works. Now I'm not saying that's what was happening here because I don't know, I'm just guessing, but the problem was that ventilation wasn't working proper, and part of the problem was down to maintenance and manpower. So apparently there'd been maintenance work going on and the fan had been shut off, and not enough boilermen, it calls them in inquest firemen, well back home a fireman's like a deputy, but they must be boilermen, and not enough boilermen had turned in, so there wasn't enough steam power. The compressor wasn't switched on at all, so whatever the form of compressed air ventilation at the coalface wasn't working, and they were just relying on the normal fan, which was only, because there wasn't enough steam being raised, only working at 2/3 capacity. So you've got a terrible situation underground, and you've got a shift of stonemen that's gone down the pit on a Sunday night to work. And again, it was a naked light that exploded an accumulation of gas and caused a devastating explosion. Now, I did find in one newspaper a detailed account, and it sounds like it was a really violent explosion, a terrible occurrence. One guy burnt right down his throat and into his lungs and that. Now one young putter was lost. It took them all night to find him amongst the debris. You know, it was a terrible situation. But anyway, 13 men died in 1916 here at Woodhorn Colliery, and that's what this memorial is for. And they actually had the manager up on a charge, although charges were dropped against him. He stated that he didn't know the compressor wasn't working at the time. Basically, they couldn't raise enough steam to get the compressor working. So it was just a catalogue of errors, which most sort of disasters are, aren't they? A catalogue of errors. Terrible explosion. Right, we're in the oldest building at the pit now. This is the jack engine, an old steam engine, and the jack engine was used when they were sinking the pits. It was used for sinking operations. So when they finished sinking, it was sort of made redundant, but always kept on hand for emergencies. Sometimes it was used for winding rails up and down the shaft. But jack engines have a very significant history in the local coalfield and a very important incident. The Northumberland and Durham coalfield was obviously notorious for its terrible mining disasters. And one of the most notorious, and one that hits closer to home, well, close to home because of the, I don't know, the horror of it really, was the new Hartley Disaster in 1862, when 204 men and boys were entombed underground, when the beam engine, the actual pumping beam, which weighed 40 odd tonnes, half of it snapped and fell down the shaft. It was a single shaft colliery, and it entrapped 204 men and boys. Well, actually, 5 men were killed in the cage, and another 199 were entombed underground. And they tried to get to them for 6 days, and when they finally got to them, obviously they were all dead. And like I said, they've got part of the pumping rods here at Woodhorn, but they're in safe storage for the time being, so we can't see them. But what they have got in this room, the jack room, because obviously at Hartley they used the jack engine to get people up and down as they were trying to rescue people in the shaft. It sounds like they've just set a fan going actually. I think they've got that Capel fan going. The men were actually hanging on ropes as they were trying to clear the shaft, but they've got a few things in here that I'd like you to see. There's 2 very poignant things here. When the men got into the yard seam, because it was a single shaft colliery like I said, but there were 2 staple shafts, there was 3 seams worked, and the men managed to get to the middle seam, but there was no way out from the yard seam, the middle seam where the furnace was. And the back overman, who was the chief superior official underground, Jim Armour, he kind of took charge of everything, and this is a copy of the last note that Jim Armour wrote, and it was done on Friday the 17th of January, talking about what was going on at the time, who was there. Very poignant, and he sealed that up, and they kind of found it when they found the men, when they finally dug their way in. And here we've got a memorial list of all the different men and boys that was killed. It's just a number, isn't it? 204. And we look at the book, look at their ages and some details that we have about them. And behind each man is a whole history. Many of them brothers, cousins, uncles. And they were just trapped. What makes it so tragic, they were just in the village. They were at the bottom of the shaft, halfway down the shaft. So near and yet so far. That's a very poignant one. George Hindmarsh, his first day at the pit, aged 30. And he was probably very apprehensive before he went, wasn't it, being his first day? I'm trying to think who the youngest one was. There's one at 14, 12, 10-year-old onsetter. So he was actually at the bottom of the shaft when the beam fell down. And this is also a very poignant one. William Smith, age 19, glassmaker, down the pit as a visitor. He only went for the day to have a look around. This young lad was 14-year-old James Duffy, and it was his job when they brought all the bodies up to identify them. Imagine that on your shoulders as a 14-year-old, eh? This is actually at the top of the Hester Pit shaft at New Hartley, 1862. The accident happened on the 16th of January 1862. And the man in the middle there is by the name of Coulson. He was a master sinker, and he was in charge of the rescue operations. All those are shaft sinkers, and they dangled off, basically off ropes, to go and try and clear the block shaft. operations done by this jack engine, just like this behind me. And it is our intention to try and do the proper story of the new Hartley disaster. I mean, mining disaster videos are 10 a penny on YouTube, but that's not to run anything down. But I feel like the new Hartley disaster, to just do a video, it's got to be right. The story's got to be told right in honour of those men that lost their lives there, but also those then that gallantly tried to rescue their comrades. And sometimes people were trying to risk their life and limb to rescue people they'd never even met before. They were just related in the fact that they were all miners. So that's something to look into, to do. But like I say, I think it's a heavy responsibility to tell the story in a proper manner. Where to finish this episode off, and I alluded to the new Hartley disaster, didn't I, when we were up at Woodhorn. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the people at Woodhorn Museum. They really made us feel really welcome, everybody. Yeah, and it's been a wonderful experience, and I hope I can do them justice with the video as well. So I've finished off here. I've come to New Hartley and the scene of where the Hester pit was, where the shaft is, and this beautiful little memorial garden. We do want to do a video about it. I hate just to call it a video. We want to record the events of 1862 properly, but it's got to be done right, like I said, for the memory of the people that were here. And I'd like to enlist other people's help who maybe know more about the machinery and things like that, maybe people from the Institute, you know. So anyway, I'll show you the garden. I'll show you around the gardens, because it's a wonderful place to finish off. Now, a place of peace, once a hive of activity and desperation, in fact. Coal have been mined round about the Hartley area. This is New Hartley. Old Hartley is nearer to Seaton Sluice, where they had salt pans and all sorts, and a harbour as well. And mining goes back to at least the 1200s, probably a lot further back than that. And in Hartley, it had been dogged. They'd had many many inrushes. They'd had a few times where the pit had been flooded out. They'd actually had to close the pits. People had lost their lives because they'd been drowned. And the old Hartley pit finally, I believe, closed when they actually got an inrush of seawater. And they came then to New Hartley. I've got to really clarify that, because I've looked in the old newspapers trying to find newspaper reports. You'd think they would mention the old pit getting flooded out, wouldn't you? But it was round about 1844, the time of the big strike, 1845, and they came here. And this didn't fare much better, because this also was drowned out for about 12 years. They ate a big feeder of water. Then they erected this massive pumping engine here. This is where the steam engine was. Apparently it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the Great North coalfield. But as you can see behind me, there's that one shaft. That's all they had, one shaft. And it wasn't the only pit round here with one shaft. There was at least 5 other collieries with one shaft. And it was sunk down to for a start, the high main, the yard, and then the low main coal. And that's where they were working in 1862 at the time of the disaster. Now, the mines inspector at highest done, he had encouraged the owners, the Cars and the Joblins, to get 2 shafts, or at least to sink staple shafts. A staple shaft is a shaft that goes between 2 seams underground, mightn't particularly come to the surface, and it's not a main shaft. Well, they did that to an extent. They put a staple shaft from the low main up to the yard, where the furnace, the ventilation furnace was, and then from the surface here down to the high main, again there was another staple shaft that drove pumps as well, but there wasn't a connection between the yard mine and the high main. And he'd encouraged that because the colliery had flooded on many occasions, well not many occasions, but on a couple of occasions. And the owners, like I said, they put those 2 staples, but they got away without sinking a second shaft, penny pinching. So all there was here was the Hester shaft, 12-foot diameter, brattice down the middle. One side was used for winding, 2 cages in it, and the other side was a great big pumping engine. The pumping engine was sat there, it was a beam engine, and the pumping rods went down the shaft there. Now then, they'd had problems with the pumps. I'm not going to go into it in any great detail until we cover it properly. They'd had problems with the pumps, and during the December they had done some maintenance, but something had happened that perhaps caused a weakness in the main beam across the top of the shaft, and there was a great drag on the pumping spears as well, causing even more friction and load on that massive pump really. With a beam engine you get a massive seesaw motion, so a massive piece of cast iron weighing about 41, 42 tons was above the shaft. Part of it was above the engine house, and the other part was above the shaft. And one morning in January of 1862, the 16th of January, around about 10:30, both shifts, both the fore shift and the back shift were underground, changing over, if you will, swapping shifts. And at that time the beam actually broke in 2, and about 20 tons of it went crashing down this shaft, the single shaft at the pit, entombing 204 men and boys underground. There was 5 or 6 people riding to bank at that time in the cage. Out of those, 1 survived, the others died. Another 2 got brought to the surface but later died of their injuries. So you had 199 men and boys trapped underneath here, so close to the village but so far. And it took 6 days to finally dig down to them. And the heroics that went on during those 6 days are absolutely unbelievable. Cut a long story short, when they reached them, all those men and boys had died basically from carbon monoxide poisoning, the fumes out of the furnace. So that was the worst disaster ever in the Great Northern Coalfield. And because of this, legislation came about that you had to have 2 shafts at each colliery. So it would be great as a tribute to do a proper programme, full programme on the history of what went on here. But for the time being, if you're in the area, why not visit the gardens? They've laid out the paths now. It's a lot different to when I first came here in the 90s. And it is a fitting tribute and a lovely peaceful place. And a nice way to end our video really, of Woodhorn Colliery Museum.